Okay, everybody, so I believe we are back on now. Sorry about that hassle with the sound issue, but it looks like we're all good. So we're getting ready to roll. And we're going to start back from the beginning since you guys couldn't hear anything Brandon and I had said, but it's great to have Brandon joining me right now. And we showed a clip of Dr. Malone. I'm not sure if all the audio was available for Dr. Malone, but as soon as that's over, Pastor Brandon and I, we're going to get into fifth generation warfare, the things that are taking place out there, the mind games that are taking place, the brainwashing that's taking place, and also this stuff that's going on with people that are saying, listen, the 7-year covenant of Daniel chapter 9, it's here, it's now, it's coming next week or whatever. We're going to deal with all of these things because we both, Brandon and I, feel that we're getting played. Especially the Christian that believes in Bible prophecy right now is being manipulated. So let's go ahead and let's start and let's roll with this video from Dr. Malone again.
Okay, over the last 3 years, you have been subjected to the most massive, harmonized, globally coordinated propaganda campaign in the history of the Western world, full stop. With this campaign, the governments of many Western nation states have turned, okay, this is key, military-grade psychological operations strategies, tactics, technologies, and capabilities developed for modern military combat against their own citizens. These are inconvenient facts. The world that many of us believed existed no longer exists if it ever did. Welcome to fifth generation warfare. The battlefield is your mind.
All right, so we are back. We got to play Robert Malone again, and Brandon is joining me. Okay, Brandon, there are so many things that we get to talk about. I'm looking at. You have some videos you've done, the subversion of the church in America.
Yeah,
you've talked about what's going on with the 7-year covenant that's not happening, along with just the mind games that are taking place too. What the enemy is sowing, the deception that's going on, all of these different things are taking place. So I'm not sure where you want to start, Brandon. I kind of want to start with the 7-year covenant that people are saying.
Let's start with that because that's on everyone's radar, and I keep getting contacted about this, and I'm sure you do too. But it's like, where are you guys getting this information from? And the concept is they're getting it off of a UN website that says, hey, we want to make sure all these sustainable goals happen before 2030. Well, that's 7 years from now. And people just took that and said, hey, they're going to do a deal here with all the nations, and they're going to make a compact together that we're going to reach these sustainable goals in 7 years. And that's the tribulation. So the rapture must be happening either in September or before this conference that the UN's having. And it's like, whoa, time out. Where are you getting that? And unfortunately, Tom, as you guys know, in the prophecy world, we have conservative prophecy teachers that study the Bible, know what it talks about. And then you have the yahoos on YouTube that say anything they want. They do newspaper eschatology, and they wrap people up in a frenzy. And really, it's Satan's way of spreading disinformation about prophecy. And it gets people to set dates. It gets people expecting things, and then they don't happen. And so they're disillusioned. And it's basically an attack on guys like you, myself, and everybody in the prophecy world that's doing our jobs. But they're making our job harder because we have to clean up their messes. So, if you were to look at what the Bible says about the 7-year covenant, the Antichrist has to be on the scene. He's making it with Israel. It's not the UN trying to establish sustainable goals. And then furthermore, we already know the content of the covenant based on Isaiah 28. And based on what Isaiah says, it's an agreement between Israel and the Antichrist to protect them from the so-called overflowing scourge, which would basically is the Jewish idiom for military invasion. So at some point in the future, Israel gets into a deal with him to protect themselves from this military scourge or overflow. So how does that relate to what the UN is doing with the 17 sustainable goals? Hey, I do believe the UN's evil, and I do believe that the 17 goals that they have are going to be the introduction of, obviously, the global government. That's true. but that's not the 7-year covenant. And it's like, how did you guys miss that one? But it's led a lot of people astray.
It totally has. In fact, those SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, unbelievable. I mean, we can tell that those goals are going to be these laws, these climate laws to manipulate the masses. But the 7-year covenant is just absurd. Brandon, you remember back this I know I'm going to tick off some people right now, but that's all right. So Trump's running for president the second time, right? Second term. And all these people in these prophecy YouTube channels started having dreams. And they're saying Trump's going to win by a landslide, and he's going to do this, and he's going to do that. And then it didn't happen. And then people said, well, he didn't get in there because there was cheating going on. Hey, God's above cheaters. You know, it's like this one. So there's this guy. This is a perfect case in point that you're making. There's this guy who comes up to me a week or two later after the election. Yeah. And he says, all you guys are liars and deceivers because you all predicted that Trump was going to win in a landslide. And I said, wait a minute, I never said any such thing. In fact, I said, pay attention to what the Bible says, and I directed people back to the Bible, and I called out those dreamers because they were everywhere. And I said, no, I said, the problem is these people don't stick to the Bible. They itch people's ears, and people are easily swayed away. And then you're looking at this going, man, there's predictions all over the place. There's science fiction involved in this. And it's like, no, we got to stick to what the Bible actually does say. Then we're not going to be misled. When Jesus talks about in Matthew chapter 24, be careful that no one deceives you, this is part of the deception. And I think, Brandon, that the prophecy world has been infiltrated by planned interference to discredit good Bible teachers, and also just by quite frankly charlatans too. And
Well, to that point, Tom, I mean, even Messiah warned about this, about the church age and how it would go. And I used 3 different parables out of the Matthew 13 parables, which are the mystery kingdom parables. So you have the parable of the wheat and the tares. So there would be enemies implanted in the church, obviously. And then you have the other parable of the mustard seed tree, which grows large, which represents Christendom. And then the birds come in and nest in its branches. And we already know what Messiah said about the birds. The birds are satanic emissaries or demonics that take the seed from the road. So he interpreted what the birds are. And basically what Messiah was saying is that there's going to be agents that are implanted into the church. So you have the seeds, and then you have agents. And then the last one is the parable of the woman who introduces leaven into the 3 loaves. And the way that's typically interpreted in a conservative way is the woman represents the whore of Babylon, representing false religions, represented by the leaven. Leaven's always introduced as sin or false doctrine. And she introduces into 3 loaves. And what conservative Christians who interpret this passage properly, I think, say that there's basically in church history been 3 branches of Christianity, Orthodox and the Catholic Church split. So you had those 2 branches, and then now you have the Protestant split. So historically, yes, there has been 3 branches, and then maybe that's the proper interpretation of the 3 loaves. But nonetheless, what's the point? That the leaven being introduced, the false doctrine, whatever, is basically a misinformation warfare. That's what Messiah was talking about. And so back to, what you played with Dr. Robert Malone, the psychops. Messiah is basically saying there's going to be a psychops with information to deceive people. And that's what we're seeing is this psychops, Tom, is so sophisticated that, yes, these YouTubers, I don't think they have a clue what they're doing. They're being used, what I call, as a useful idiot for demonics. And I think the demonic is behind all of this, because these guys on YouTube, they're not smart enough to come up with this stuff. The stuff they're coming up with is coming from demonic intelligence and serving as to undermine you and I and ruin our credibility. Why? Because we get, just like you said, we get lumped in with them. Hey, you guys predicted Trump was going to win, and your guys are all liars. All you prophecy guys are nuts. And I think that's one of the tactics. But the other tactic is to get the remnant deceived into following the wrong, trails, and to get them off the trail. Because if you get into conspiracy theories, dude, you're going to get off the trail so fast, and you're going to end up in a pit that not only do you lose credibility, but you can shipwreck your faith in many ways, because you're like, well, they had a blood moon and Jesus didn't come back or whatever. They said the rapture is going to happen and he didn't. So now I'm all distraught. I'm done with it. And they basically shipwreck their belief in the coming of the Messiah. So it has serious implications.
It does. I remember way back, I think it was 2008, I got wrapped up in the blood moons for probably about a month or so. And then I started looking at it with more objectivity, and I said, wait a minute, this stuff doesn't make any biblical sense. I mean, because you can take, the problem is some of these guys are exceptionally good at taking a word and reading something into it that makes the common person go, maybe, you know what? And next thing you know, you got science fiction and you got everything else going, and people are sucked right in. And in 2 Timothy chapter 4, where we are told, hey, in those latter times, listen, people are going to raise up for themselves teachers that will itch their ears. They're not going to endure sound doctrine. The problem is this has infiltrated the prophecy world, where it's more sensationalism, it's more of the itching of the ears, it's all of this. And the other dynamic, going back to what you were originally saying about the SDGs, just the fact that the UN says in 7 years we want to accomplish this. Listen, just taking that 7 years, therefore it's allowing the news to dictate what the Bible says. It's getting the whole thing wrong. You can never do that. You have to go with the Bible first. So when you see people getting deceived, what's the the best way to keep from being deceived?
Okay, it's this principle, and I think everyone needs to learn it now, because the deep state is focusing its target on Christianity to eliminate us from Western society, and this is where the psychops is. It's called the plausibility factor, Tom. And what happens in a psychops is to deceive people. You have to give that, oh yeah, it's very plausible that the UN is evil and would do nefarious things. That's true. Or the Biden administration is nefarious, or the World Health Organization. Okay, so you have to get a plausibility. That's how the deception works. Is this plausible? Because if it's not plausible, people won't believe it. So when you say that the UN is going to do something evil, there's your plausibility factor. Yeah, you're right. They're probably, everything they do is wrong. But here's where the line gets crossed. Is it plausible, but then is it biblical, or do you have facts and evidence that this is what's happening? Like when you heard QAnon, Trump's going to ground them up and put everyone in jail, and he's got a secret for them, and he's kind of going to come back. Well, there's a plausibility factor in it, but you have no evidence and fact. And that's the problem with deception. Deception runs on plausibility, but not facts and evidence. And that's the key in understanding prophecy. So if you're going to make a statement in prophecy, you better back that up with facts and evidence. But so what is Satan's goal then? His goal is to get the believer to believe the plausibility, but then overstate something that's not true because of the plausibility factor, and then discredit them as crazy. Because what is the deep state? What are they trying to say about Christians? That we're not only haters and homophobic and Islamophobic and all this other stuff, that we are conspiracy theorists, and that these conspiracy theorists need to stop. And so that's why they want to curtail free speech and freedom of religion, because we're anti-government, we're anti-LGBT. And so every time we buy into this, we look crazy, and it gives them more of a reason to say why they should outlaw Christianity in the West. That's where this is all heading.
Yeah. Remember, not too long ago, it was in Australia, I think it was December 22. It was that group that was labeled as they were prophecy people. They believed in the rapture. They believed in the 7-year tribulation and the millennial kingdom. And recall how the Australian authorities, they marginalized and labeled anybody with that kind of belief is a problem for the world. And and that's already been put out there, officially been put out there.
And the Department of Homeland Security has put that type of person on the list.
So remember that? This is pre-COVID.
Yeah.
Remember that?
Yes, I
When
do.
it was those who taught Bible prophecy were on the watch list, Department of Homeland
right.
Security. So these things have been there for quite some time, but now we're starting to see them come out. And I believe that it's these people on YouTube that are being used.
Yes.
Some are plants, some are just useful idiots, as you say, to flesh out people. I mean, people get deranged. You know, you start seeing.
Yeah, they do. And Tom, you probably get this a lot. I mean, being in the prophecy world, you get a lot of the conspiracy theorists. And I got people telling me that they believe JFK is still alive. They believe Elvis is still alive. I mean, it's just like, what are you talking about, man? That doesn't represent us. But they bring that with them. And that right there instantaneously loses credibility in the culture. Instantaneously, you telling me that Elvis is alive or JFK is alive and they have him in a bunker or something like that, and it's like, oh my goodness, are you crazy? Yes, but see, that person then goes around and spreads that to everybody, and then they attend my church or your church, and oh yeah, you're one of them. And just the fact that they say they go to 412 church or they go to Rock Harbor church instantaneously discredits us with other people. And so Satan is working through even useful idiots who believe in this kind of stuff. Why? Because we have the only truth. Here's my thing. If we weren't speaking the truth, then why doesn't Satan attack preterism? Why doesn't he attack all-millennialism? Why doesn't he attack post-millennialism? No, we're going to attack the pre-trib, premillennial views. That's the only view that gets attacked.
That's an excellent point. Just when you start thinking, yeah, it's the pre-trib, it's the people that say Jesus is coming back and will rule and reign for 1,000 years. That is the only view that is attacked. You also talked recently about the separation of the wheat and tares. You talked a few minutes ago about it too. Right. But when we look at it, I look at this is dynamic that I see. Somebody told me, look at your church or Jack's church or our church, others that didn't close, right? We just stayed open. Right. And the churches are still moving forward and so forth. But overall, you see the numbers of, you read the numbers and they say church attendance is way down and so forth, which I know it is. And I think there's, and so people will say to me, well, no, the church attendance is down. I'll say, no, it's way down overall. Because for every church that's still open, you can probably multiply that exponentially from the amount of churches that closed or have gone woke. So you have a major separation of the wheat and tares. We are living through a departure from the faith, as 1 Timothy chapter 4 says, will take place in the latter times. Doctrines of demons, deceiving spirits. We're living through it. I don't think it'll be fulfilled in its entirety until the tribulation period. But where Paul writes in there in 1 Timothy chapter 4, in the latter times, you'll see these things, even forbidding to marry and commanding that you don't eat meat. I mean, you look at this and you go, it's like, how can somebody read a passage like that, the first 3 verses of 1 Timothy chapter 4, and go, how could Paul have known this about, I mean, it's like, it fits what we are going through perfectly.
You're hitting on a good point, because what happens now that I'm noticing this, because churches like ours, yours, myself, and people in this group, Jack, whatever this world that we're in, we see exponential growth. We've quadrupled in size, and yet the other churches are dying on the vine. That anyone that goes woke, they start dying instantaneously. But here's the interesting thing that I'm noticing. There is a cognitive dissonance that starts happening in people when you tell them that your world is crumbling around you. You and I and people that are probably listening to us in our audience understand that. We look around and like, wow, this thing's going to Hades in a handbasket. We're heading for the tribulation. There's no doubt about it. You can see the signs. The church is ended in apostasy. You start telling that to people that have been living in a bubble, they start having cognitive dissonance in their head, because it doesn't square with a Joel Osteen mentality of everything's going to be good. We're going to have this great revival. Every day is Friday, and we're going to win America back. I mean, that becomes the problem in a lot of people not accepting the reality as it is. Tom, and they fight it, they protest it, and this is why when I had a recent poll that I pulled up where it's like 54% of the pastors, believe like you and I do, pre-trib, premillennial. They believe they're in the last days, and this was according to Lifeway. But 24% of them speak to their congregations maybe once a month about it, maybe. So even though a poll says 48% or whatever evangelical pastors believe it, they won't talk about it. And I know why, and you know why. It creates it. Well, I don't want to make them afraid. This is going to hurt my nickels and noses. So we're just going to cocoon ourselves and pretend nothing's happening, right? And so we're having a hard time getting the word out through the church because the churches are not doing their job. And then at the same time, we have this other psyops happening in the prophecy world to silence us and to lose credibility. So it's a very difficult time. And I think this is one of the reasons why people don't see it. Either they're deceived or they just don't want to know, Tom. That's the main two reasons.
Yep. The deception is great in the church. I'm going to ask you about alien invasion here in just a second too. But I just looking at what is taking place in churches, I do want to state this. Brandon is pastor up at Rock Harbor in Bakersfield. And Pastor Brandon has put together a church tracker list,
yes.
Which, by the way, I've taken your lead, and we started to develop one also.
Right.
And looking at this, what we need is understanding churches and pastors that are willing to speak the truth. So finding different churches throughout the country. And
that's been an unbelievable experiment, Tom, because we started with 1,600. I've whittled the thing down to 300.
Yeah. Well, I started with a very low number, just with guys that I know.
Yeah, that's good. I should have probably did it that way. But man, we were shocked that even these so-called remnant churches were really not in the game with us, Tom. When we called them and talked to them, we found out that what the pastor believed didn't match their statement of faith, and it was a disaster. And we had to whittle this all down to about 300. Gideon's 300, I call it.
Yeah. Well, speaking of statement of faith, I mean, statements of faith are on all churches' websites. I'm thinking they've probably been there for generations. Mm-hmm. The next pastor doesn't even want to touch it because if he changes anything, if he really tells what he thinks, then some of the people who've been there for a while might be upset. So they just let it go, although they really don't believe it themselves.
That's right.
But and by the way, Pastor Brandon and I will both be with Billy Crone and Mondo and Ken Michael. We're going to be in Europe here starting next week. So we're going to be Ireland, Scotland, and Italy. You can find out information to join us on any of our websites. You can go to them and check it out, and we would love to see you guys there. And somebody in here quoted 412 Temecula. Is Tim Thompson on your 412 tracker? They say he's not. On your church tracker.
Okay, I'll double check on that, but I'll look.
Hey, you know what? I wasn't on there now that I think about it.
You weren't? Are you on there
I'm not going to put you on mine then. Hey, I just thought of that.
I'll double check. I know you're on. I'll double check with Tim, but Tim should be on. Yeah, there's sometimes we miss it. I'm not directing.
I get it. Somebody just commented on here. By the way, everybody, Tim is going to be joining me on Alex Newman's tomorrow on exclusive on the app. Tim Thompson will be joining me in a couple weeks, exclusive on the app. Pastor Brandon is going to be coming back, exclusive on the app. So, on the app exclusive, we can say a lot of things. So, okay, to the UFOs.
Okay.
Alien invasion. I believe, personally, you have two different dynamics that are, three. Some people are nuts. They're seeing things that aren't there. Another one is the government likely has aircraft or whatever that they've developed that can do very strange things.
Absolutely.
And another one is just flat out demonic. And I believe this is also part of this fifth generation warfare. And coming from the government's side, I was talking with Monkey just not too long ago about the Project Bluebeam, which was in the late 1990s. He said, look, that's really old technology. He says the government has things that are unbelievable that are going to make people believe they've seen UFOs, and some of them actually are flying. These things really are. Your thoughts on all of this? Because it looks to me like it is all part of this lie.
It is, and it is part of the psychological warfare. There's no doubt about it. Here's the thing. The UFO phenomenon is you're right, and Monkey's right totally. And as you watch this, there's been governmental technology that are way beyond our understanding of what they've been able to be capable of. And there's a whole side story to this, by the way, on the technology and actually where they got the technology. But that's another story. The other issue then is what is the maybe 5% or 10% that's real in the skies that we're seeing? And I think it's totally fallen angels and demons. There's no doubt about that. And so you have a combination of two things. You have the government, and then you have really demons manifesting themselves in orbs or whatnot. Our pilots are picking them up on radar and whatnot, so you can't deny it. But here's my question, and I think everyone out there needs to understand it. Why at this time, since 2017, did the government release all this all of a sudden? Because all these years have been hush-hush. Oh, you guys are crazy. That's the conspiracy theories, believing in aliens. And now all of a sudden, oh, yeah, they're real. And we have remember the one guy he used them? We have biometrics or whatever. They found alien life or something in one of the spacecraft, and this guy's in front of Congress saying this, right? And so why all of a sudden now? What are you planning? So my thing is, things don't happen by accident. It's planned because they have to have another crisis. They always have to have crises, whether that's saving the planet or it's a pandemic or it's whatever. They got to have crises to get control. And so I think the government now is using these things along with their technology to maybe create another crisis. I mean, imagine if you're going to have a global government, let's just say we're going to start a global government, you and me, Tom. Well, one of the things we have to do is convince people that they need it. And the only way you can convince them of that, to work all together, is that we have a global problem that needs to be addressed. That's beyond our borders. That it affects China, it affects Russia, it affects America and Canada. And what else could you have? You have experimental, contrived, I don't want to get you in trouble, you know what?
Yeah.
Okay.
We can save that for when you're back in a few weeks.
Yeah, right. And so you have that caused a worldwide stir. Now they're trying to push the global warming hoax, which is it's everybody's concern. And what about the alien thing? Okay, that being the case, interesting enough, if anyone reads Chuck Missler's book, and Chuck broke this out really good, and back in this is the late 90s, he talked about. I think the book was called Alien Invasion, and where these necromancers were channeling demons, but they obviously the demons were saying they were avatars from the future or whatever, and they were saying, hey, look, this is what's going to go down. There's going to be a great evacuation, the demons called it. And in this great evacuation, about 2 billion people will disappear. And this is like quote for quote in Chuck's book, what they said, the demons. And then they said, there are going to be two phases to it, actually. The first phase is going to take the people that are holding back Mother Earth from achieving her next spiritual evolution that is harming the planet. And they're going to be taken and re-educated, and the spaceships are going to beam them up. And then they're going to be beamed up to higher spaceships, word for word. And then they said, and don't worry about the children. There's going to be missing children all over the planet and babies and whatnot. But don't worry, we have taken them and we're going to use them to populate another planet and start another creation. I mean, when you see that, the demonic already has a narrative, and the narrative includes aliens. And the funny thing about, if you watch demonic activity over the centuries, demons always can shapeshift and do whatever they need to do in order to fool the populace. So like, for instance, there was UFOs in the 1800s, and they were in the form of balloons. That's how they appeared. If you go to the Middle Ages, they weren't afraid of aliens, but the demons just cloaked themselves in the forms of trolls and goblins and witches riding brooms, which was a real phenomenon that the demons actually would transport witches on brooms. And that's where the concept of a witch with a broom came from. But what was that? It was demonic activity. So the demons always figure out what scares the culture at the time. Well, today, we're not afraid of trolls and goblins and witches riding brooms. We're afraid of aliens that have superior technology, superior intellect, and could be a threat to humanity. So I think this is where it's all going, and it is a psyops. There's no doubt about it.
You have to create a crisis, right?
Yes.
We can't have emergency powers if you don't have an emergency. So let's make these emergencies. And so when you mention you have a threat of an alien invasion, which I personally, the more I look at it, I believe it's just a matter of time before it's announced of we've made contact, this is happening. It could be after the rapture, before it gets disclosed publicly. But when we look at everything that's developing right now, it's all of it is a fear tactic. Every bit of it, whether it be there's going to be a cyber attack, Russia's going to come after us. There's going to be a nuclear attack. China's going to do this. There's going to be we know what the president guy said. Between him and Kamala Harris, the one who loves the yellow buses, we know what they've been saying about this new pandemic that has now arrived. We're watching schools, we're watching Oprah, we're seeing what they're all saying about those different things. We know about digital currency, and this is the only way we're going to be able to save the economy. They are trashing, they are doing every single thing they can to destroy the economy, everything they can, and it's global. And by the way, everybody, if you think China's economy is doing good, it is not. China is in all kinds of trouble economically. So we are seeing these things, but the worst decisions are being made, and they're being made intentionally to bring about, I believe, as much chaos as possible. You got to have some kind of global effect, and I do believe predominantly it really has to affect the Western world. More than anything else. The United States is a problem. Kissinger said it's a problem. The Constitution of the United States stands in the way. You mentioned evolution, just talking about the whole process. When you hear the guys like Yuval Harari and these tech people talk, they basically admit this. Evolution as we know it has ended. What they're admitting is they can't find any evidence of any change. Right. So evidence of evolution, or evolution has ended as we know it. Therefore, the next step in evolution is going to be technology, where you're going to be like God, and you're going to have all these superpowers and everything else. The lies are incredible, but the only way they're going to get people on board is through the fear, through the chaos. I'm waiting for something very catastrophic to happen that is not an earthquake, but something that is actually planned. I know people say that there is, with HAARP, they can create earthquakes and so forth, but nevertheless, something's really bigger coming.
There is, and I want to give you some stats, and for the audience to think about this. And Matthias Desmet is the guy who did the study on this. And Matthias Desmet studied the psychological factor of mass hypnosis, so to speak, or mass delusion of like entire populations believing a lie. And here's what they found out. They found out that in any given population over a period of time, whether you're looking at Nazi Germany or you're looking at Russia with the Bolshevik Revolution, or you're looking at right now in America, or with what we went through the last few years, what they will find is an interesting stat that 30% of the population will believe whatever lie the government tells them. Hands down, they don't question it. They just follow hook, line, and sinker. These people don't have a brain, apparently, and they just follow anything what the government tells them to do, and they just go right over the cliff, okay? Then there's the other part of the population that's 65%, he said. And it's that 65% that knows something's wrong, but they go along with it because they don't want to give up their jobs. They don't want to give up their relationships or whatever. So they know it's wrong, but they go along with the program knowing it's wrong. And then what's left from that is the 5%. And it's the 5% in any given population that never believes the lie. And the key in all of this is, what will that 5% do? Because based on that, what that 5% does depends on if that 5% can bring the 65% back over to sanity and to truth. But if that 5% doesn't do its job to warn people, to tell people, then you will lose the 65% to the 30%, and you have 95% of the population who went with went along with Hitler. And that's statistically across the board. So what you start seeing, Tom, it doesn't take much to push an entire population over the edge. 30% will believe you, and the other ones will go with you just to keep their job and their livelihood. And it's all based on fear, right? It's all based on fear. But that is a scary stat. So whatever it's nuclear war, the economy, we got to go digital, or it's ESG, in your digital economy. That, man, if you don't play ball here, we're going to shut you out from the banks. Look what they did to Nigel Farage in England. They shut him off from the banks. They couldn't find. When he went to 9 different banks and they wouldn't bank with him because his ESG scores were so low. Well, that's coming to us. Well, watch. You're going to watch the 65% know that this is wrong, but compromise to go along with it, just to keep their job or whatever, So what's coming, you're right, is scary. And I hope your audience and my audience and everyone listening is part of that 5% that doesn't get deceived and helps pick out those in the 65% group to come out of that nonsense.
Yeah. Hence, we're to be watchmen and warning people. I mean, Jesus, Mark chapter 13, watch, be ready, watch, I say to you, watch, I say to all. And this is one of the reasons why we do what we do. And right. I would imagine most of the people who watch who are involved in our churches or watch the videos that we do like this, they want to be involved, and they are involved. And why we write, why we put out material, because we have to warn people. After the rapture, that 65% is going to completely capitulate.
Absolutely. At that point, it's game over.
Yeah, I mean, and when you look at it, what is it? It's the threat. You won't have a job. You're not going to be able to pay your bills. It's all of these things unless you go along with this system, whatever that system is. We know it's the system of the beast. I have a question for you. This is from Jason Hernandez. Can a church, in your opinion, be a remnant church if they teach through the Bible in context, verse by verse, but they don't talk about the headlines, type of content, or mandates, etc.?
Well, yes, they can be a remnant church, but it's just like what Tom and I are talking about. We have people that teach the Bible from pillar to post, but here's my thing. If you're not applying the scriptures to what's going on, then you're missing out on what the pastor's role is. And quite frankly, if I'm going to tell a remnant believer to go to a church, but that church is going to pretend it's in a bubble and nothing's going on and is not going to warn the people, then why would I send that person to a shepherd who won't warn the flock of the enemies? And what I always say is this: the shepherd holds 2 staffs. He holds a rod and he holds the shepherd's crook. The shepherd's crook is for the rounded top that's meant to keep unity of the flock. But what is the rod for? Jesus comes back and rules with a rod of iron. It is there to beat away enemies. It is there to identify. So if I have a pastor that won't identify enemies, won't tell people what's going on, he's not doing his job, and they're not going to make my church tracker list. I can guarantee you that. Yeah. Because he's not doing his job. So he might teach the Bible, and there's plenty of churches like that, but they pretend as if nothing's going on. They're not warning people. They're not preparing people. How can you say you're a pastor if you're not going to prepare people? Look, I don't indiscriminately give up headlines in my sermons. I'm making a point with the headline. Like, for instance, I made a point with the headline on Sunday that California is getting ready to sign in a bill that says that a child going transgender or LGBT, and if they're not affirmed by the parent, then that child can be taken away from the parent. If you're not warning your flock about that, you got a problem.
This stuff that is happening is so evil. And when you look at it, what happened with the prophets in the Old Testament? They challenged the culture. They were involved. You know, in today's church, you can't, well, you're just being political. It's not being political. It's about right and wrong. So you look at the Old Testament prophets that were faithful. They preached against the king. They preached against the politicians. They preached against the fake priests. They preached against the false prophets. The New Testament apostles, they're murdered for what they were talking about. Paul talked about the problems with Rome, the problems that were going on in culture, confronted them. Look at Corinth, and you see these things. They did it throughout the Old Testament, throughout the New Testament. We've got to have the guts to be able to face these things and talk about them. And I look at the book of Revelation, where one of the things God calls out the people for and brings judgment on the world is they're cowards. And I believe specifically it's too cowardly to stand against culture and stand up for Christ. You don't want to stand up for Christ. You refuse to press against these things. And you go, well, are you either for me or against me? Mm-hmm. And right now, the test is there of whether or not you're going to be a coward in the pulpit. That might sound mean, but that's the reality of it.
But Tom, I totally join you with it, because that's what we're seeing is a bunch of cowards in the pulpit. And they won't go after evil. And you're totally right. The prophets of old were different than the priests. And people have to get this in their mind. A priest dealt with the religious aspects in the nation of Israel, but the prophets were meant to be the political hammer on the political schema in Israel. That's why they hammered kings, and that's why they hammered even priests and stuff for what they were doing. So you and I, Tom, are not doing anything that an Old Testament prophet didn't do. And the fact that, it's just political, well, then let me ask you, I got people that walk out of my church when I go after them, people murdering babies. And they say, Brandon, that's too political. I was at a conference down there in Huntington, and someone got out mad because I went after abortion. Well, what am I supposed to do? Would not defend the life of the innocent? I'm just going to stay quiet because that's too political? You're going to be out of your mind. I'm not going to do that. And check it out, Tom. It was at whatchamacallit's church in Huntington. What's his name? We had the conference at Joe's church, and the person had given money and told Joe, "I want my money back."
And Joe, crazy. And Joe is so on fire. And preaches against that stuff all the time. So you're looking at how did they ever end up at Joe's church? Maybe it was a fluke. And I had Seth Gruber out not too long ago. He ruffled a few feathers. And you gotta preach the truth. You gotta preach the truth. When we see this, this shifting going on, these mind games. There's no doubt about it. This fifth generation warfare. This question comes from Mechanic 350. And this will be the last one, because I know we went a little bit over because of the audio issues. Can you explain to me what the Hegelian dialectic is? I guess in a nutshell. I mean, you can get real involved, but what would be your nutshell? And then I'll give my nutshell one on that.
Well, to understand the Hegelian dialectic, that's actually what's being practiced right now. And to understand it's you have a thesis and an antithesis. And what they try to do is bring the two together in a compromise or a third way called the synthesis. And so they pose two extremes at the same time, say, well, yeah, these are extremes, but let's then compromise in the middle here. And so what it does is cause the Christian or the church or the pastor to compromise and come together. So like what Rick Warren did with Chrislam. Well, we have Christianity and Islam at both poles, but we're going to say we worship the same God. That's the Hegelian dialectic in action. And what it does is that's what's being imposed on the church. Well, the church, that they're trying to get the Hegelian dialectic to work with wokeism right now in the church. Well, don't you care about the poor, Brandon? Don't you care about people who want to have a better life? Why would you say lock up the borders, Brandon? Don't you care about illegal aliens and stuff like that? Don't you care about humanity? Not understanding that they're practicing the Hegelian dialectic because no, it's not that I don't care. It's that I do not reward law breaking. That is not allowed in Scripture. Just because I want a better life doesn't mean I go and rob banks. And just because we have open borders doesn't mean someone can come over here and get $2,200 a month, more than $1,400 a month that someone on Social Security gets as a citizen who paid into Social Security. The violating Scripture, violating principles is not to be rewarded. And that's what we're having at the border. But what is that? That's a Hegelian dialectic. Well, Brandon, you just need to be compassionate. Really? For sin? For someone breaking the law? I don't think that's how it's worked. That's not Christianity. That's Marxism. And what's happening right now, the psychops, Tom, the Hegelian dialectic, really, I say wokeism, but really it's cultural Marxism coming into the church. That's what this is. And so you have like David Platt and all these other guys apologizing for their white privilege and junk like that. And you're like, whoa, that's Marxism. What are you guys talking about? Racial reparations and stuff like that. It's like, whoa, time out. Matt Chandler, those kinds of guys.
Yeah, totally is total Marxism. By the way, Olivier Melnick has joined us in the chat. So hi Olivier.
Olivier, all right, man.
Good to have you join us. One of the simplest illustrations of a Hegelian dialectic is you go to buy a car. Sticker price is way out here. Before you go there, you go, I ain't paying that. And you already know in your mind, I'm getting them way down here. Well, they never intended to get the sticker price. They just wanted you to meet them here. And sure enough, they get you there. They got you to meet them. That's the simplest way to understand how it works. But spiritually, we are in it. We are being played. This whole fifth dimension warfare or the fifth, whatever, not fifth dimension. That was a band from the 60s. We are living through this process. And Brandon, that was so spot on today about how not to be deceived, and you've got to be in the Word. You can't turn to the left or the right. The deception is coming from all angles. It's coming from all angles. It's not just after the liberals or the left. It's after the conservatives. It's after everybody. The enemy hates us all, and we've got to be part of that 5%. We have to be.
You have to be the 5% because big money is being poured into the church to co-opt the church. Oh, I'll tell you, I'll just roll them off. Open Societies Foundation, George Soros is pouring money into the church. Rand Corporation, Gates Foundation, Kern Family Foundation, the Acton Institute, the National Christian Foundation, National Immigration Forum, the Templeton Foundation, Poverty Cure, and Okonomia, all are pouring, guys, get this, billions of dollars into Christianity to turn it into a Marxist liberation theology in America. That's what's happening right now. Billions.
Oh, yeah. Look at just think of how many churches are taking that money, and guess what they're going to do? They're going to go the direction of the money. It's like being a politician. They've been bought out.
That's right. The seminaries are being bought out. The churches are being bought out. This is a major thing. And it's within the last 10 years, Tom, that this has been going on.
Yeah. And it's only getting worse.
Yeah.
We are experiencing the departure from the faith. Tomorrow, Alex Newman is going to be joining me live, exclusive on the app. That will be quite exciting with Alex. Brandon, thanks for joining me today. I know you're super busy. It was great. As always, I look forward to seeing you in Europe. Next week will be Ireland, Scotland, and Italy. And then Brandon will be joining me live, exclusive on the app in a few weeks too, right after we're back from Europe. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. God bless. See you all later.